Welcome, everyone. Please mute yourself if you're not talking. Welcome to SIG-Apps. It's December 19th. This is strictly a planning meeting, an introduction to the 1.5 retrospective, so we won't have demos today. We'll begin with the 2017 planning document. We'll want to resolve any comments there, fill in any blank spots. So like I said before, if you have anything to add there, please do so now. We'll want to confirm that document at the end of today's meeting, or at least by the end of day. Then we'll go over 1.5 and review what we wanted to do and what we got done. So again, if you have anything to add there, please do so. All of the links can be found in the agenda document, which I linked in the chat, and I can do so in just a minute. After that, we'll do the planning for the 1.6 specific cycle, and we'll base that off of our 2017 planning document. So feel free to check that doc out as well. Eric, do you want to lead the 2017 planning session?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay. Do you want me to share the doc, or would you like to?
If you don't mind, I didn't do so well last time.
Okay, I'll do it. No problem. Just give me 1 second here. Okay. Here you are.
Okay, maybe just go down comment by comment and we can just talk about each one.
That sounds great. So the first one is on local storage.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything controversial there other than just that if anyone who thinks local storage is important should maybe convey that to the SIG storage mailing list. And I've heard from people on SIG storage that in January they're going to do some more planning, and I'll make sure that I'm there to tell them we would like local storage. Does anyone disagree that we want local storage and stateful set to work well? Okay.
Yes, we need that.
Yep. So that's not controversial. I'll just leave that there. Next one.
So this concern was that this overlaps with SIG scheduling, and that we should maybe leave this in the SIG scheduling group. But then I went back, after I read this, I went back and looked up at your description of this document, and you had mentioned there that, you know, these quotes are not only like SIG-Apps specific. So do we have any thoughts?
Yeah, like you said, my thought was, let's start from what users want. Users don't care what the structure of our SIG is. And then, you know, let's figure out what our goals are for our users and then figure out who does it.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. We set this SIG up specifically to be able to do what David is concerned with, because somebody has to represent that holistic app focus. And the only point of Kubernetes is to run apps. SIG scheduling is a little bit more like SIG node, where it takes requirements from use cases. And this is like the use case.
But absolutely, I see us as like developing requirements and then working closely with SIG scheduling and taking hands off in terms of exactly how that gets implemented. You know, I don't care what algorithm they use to place this stuff.
Yeah, and I've seen like some of the workloads here. It seems like are workloads that actually are driven by some sort of controller in other resource managers. So I think some of the work there is actually creating those controllers, not necessarily custom resources or resources within Kubernetes. So that's kind of in our purview as well.
Yeah, and it may be some, for instance, like the API machinery team is the one who actually helps make reusable components or libraries that can be used to do controllers.
Yep.
But you know, the requirements for that need to be driven from this SIG.
Okay, let's keep that there, and I'll follow up afterwards and just summarize what we said.
Okay. Something about the Helm tool. So do we have anything that we want to add? Well, we should add something here, but what does the group think about adding a quote for the breadth of Helm.
Yes, I think one of the big things is that right now Helm is very good at like installation of apps, but I think we need more work on kind of life cycle. So I can trust my Helm to be my life cycle management for my applications or something like that, where really round out the rest of the life cycle in a way that can help people manage their apps.
Does that look good?
I don't care if the Helm is here or some other doc, but I think that there's some things that's not clear to me whether or not they should be done more in the like core controllers or whether they should be done more in Helm. Like Helm could have more robust upgrade support, or there could be more robust upgrade support in controllers. And I don't know what's right, but if the Helm team has a vision, I would love that to be shared so we can kind of prioritize relative to the controllers work as well. So share when you're ready, I guess.
Okay.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the kind of discussion is about how much functionality goes in a deployment tool versus in like core config.
Okay. Matt Butcher, Adam Reese, do you want to comment here?
I got in just in the middle of Eric explaining that.
Okay.
You want me to say it one more time, or?
Yeah, please. And then I think I can help.
I'd say I wrote this planning doc with a little bit more attention to the controllers, which I understand better. Helm is going to be a really important part too. I think there's some things that aren't clear to me about whether or not like upgrading and like status and various features of deploying an app, whether or not they're going to live more in the core controllers in the core system or some functionality is going to be more in Helm. So as we try to navigate that, seeing what Helm's vision is for what they want to add to their tool will inform also what we do with controllers. So we look forward to hearing your vision for the year and whether that's in this doc or your own doc or whatever form you want to do it. But let's sync up our plans.
Yeah, because I think we're trying to steer clear of implementing control logic that would better be done in controllers. Templating is always sort of the gray area, right? Because it could be done in any number of places. But as far as orchestrating deployments, we're hoping that more and more things get solved in controllers. So, for example, config maps changing, triggering, restarting of pods so that the pod can pick up the new config maps, something like that. It's always stuff that we would prefer is handled in Kubernetes core over us trying to do it. I guess the one gray area that I can readily identify now is that Helm does have a concept of a release, and a release is basically an arbitrary grouping of components that were specified in a chart, right? We don't necessarily have any sort of Kubernetes generic way of expressing that one particular concept. So we figure there will be some cases where we need to solve issues at that layer of abstraction. But in most of the others, we're hoping that controllers and core will gradually begin to address things that are sticking points for operators.
Yeah, I guess maybe we start from users case. Like there's a critical security release in fix for MySQL. Like what is the flow from CVE to my release is happy, and what responsibilities do we think belong to Helm versus core Kubernetes for getting the right image running, and then the same question would go for like what if there's a breaking upgrade to like Cassandra and like, oh, we've changed our communication format this major release. So does that mean, does Helm assist you with, go like running the pre and post upgrade scripts, or, does that need to be part of stateful set, or I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah, and we had sort of assumed that Kubernetes would reveal more and more tools, like when init containers came out, that would help us make it possible for chart developers to solve that problem, right? Because Cassandra, good example, right? Some kind of change that requires a data migration, or some kind of backward compatibility fix or something like that. If we have the components, so the issue there is that a human at some point needs to be the one to make the decision about how that upgrade needs to happen. And the idea with the chart was that the chart is the experience where the human operator can say, this is the way that it should be done. And then Kubernetes would increasingly expose tools that make that easier and easier to do, right? So init containers in that case are probably the method through which somebody would do a restore, for example. A pre-shutdown hook, if we ever had something like that, would be a nice place to be able to do a dump. And those would all be things that I would imagine belonging in Kubernetes pieces. And Helm will try and increasingly focus on making it easier for the domain expert, DevOps or developer or operator to say, here's what the life cycle should look like in this particular case, and make it easier and easier for them to express that somehow, while Kubernetes is surfacing the kind of internal.
Helm is about the best way to express the declarative intent, but most of the making the intent happen, you would hope to be in Kubernetes core.
If I could do things my way, that's the way it would go, because Helm shouldn't become a blocking tool where nobody can do these kinds of things without Helm. Ideally, someone else should be able to build a different kind of tool that leverages the features of Kubernetes and can do similar things, right?
Yeah.
That's where it's an easy place to draw a line, and then we can say Helm should not be the only way to do X, or Helm should be,
Yeah, and I would add, like, there's the kind of the three things that Helm is doing pretty good job of today, which is install, simple upgrade, and potentially more complex upgrade, as things like removing or adding components comes in. And then there's the other questions, which are, some types of major upgrades are different from others and tend to be much rarer. So do you turn those into something that's part of Helm, but is only used once for very specific transformations? Like, when you go from one API version to another, some upgrades just are harder than others. And then beyond that, there's the maintenance style tasks. Had you guys considered maintenance style tasks within the remit of Helm, or is that something that you would express within your chart and mostly leave that outside the detail? Things like, Postgres vacuuming as a great example of something that periodically needs to happen, and it depends on much more than just an initial deployment, but it might be different for each deployment.
So maintenance tasks is a little bit of a fuzzy category, but we've many times talked about cron-like tasks, that we could have a Kubernetes controller of some sort that could trigger cron-like tasks. And so say you have something like that, Helm's role on that would merely be to make it easier for use it if you can find it in the cluster. For in-pod maintenance or in-pod maintenance tasks or periodic tasks, again, I think we're not in the domain that Helm is going to solve problems. This would be solved by sidecar containers.
So I do think, though, that the charts maintainers want to have the ability to provide those things. And if their artifact that they're providing users is the Helm chart, then there should be some level of functionality that they can give to make that easier for people. So like if I've installed Postgres, maybe I know that I have to do a vacuum. It'd be great if I just had a way to just do that easily without having to figure out, okay, which container or which pod do I have to exec into, then which container within this pod in order to run this command, which is the vacuum. You know what I mean? I think it's a service.
This is still speaking Rantis here. We are the company behind the app controller. So we have an idea to actually tackle some of the lifecycle management issues that you are talking with respect to Helm. We have been working on a POC that right now deploys Helm and takes care about some lifecycle management tasks. And when it comes to app controller, it now satisfies mostly the deployment scenario, like the dependent layers. But we are working on extending it also with lifecycle management capabilities. So, for example, you'll be able to trigger certain action on the dependent items on the graph based on some event happening to one of the pods that the other ones are dependent on. So there is we will be happy to contribute to give Helm the lifecycle management capability. It will be great for us.
So Matt, are you against having Helm operate in that I guess runtime state, like in between upgrades and new releases?
I mean,
I'm not against, but what I'm saying is that we are doing work that will fit nicely into what Helm is providing and extend it.
Yeah, and I think that's for Helm largely. We want to be focused on what we can express through a chart, and then when there are additional tools that would allow us to do that kind of thing, I would be all for integrating with those.
Cool.
Okay, I heard that there was a lot of good thoughts. I wasn't able to capture them all, and I don't think I heard complete agreement. It sounds like sussing out app controller, Helm, and core controller kind of responsibilities is an area for design in the next couple of quarters. So that's exciting.
For those that don't know, the app controller team and the Helm team have been kind of working here and there to try and put together some kind of proof of concept that would really show how the two are complementary tools. And the app controller team has been working very hard on that recently. So
cool. All right. In the interest of time, move on, even though we could probably fruitfully spend a meeting talking about this topic.
Yeah, let's put that on the schedule. Okay. So do we have something on upstreaming OpenShift templates?
So in my opinion on this, Eric, and I don't know, we haven't really talked about this in the last week or so. Brian's out and won't be back till after holidays on PTO. One of the things we've been discussing is this may fit more cleanly in the extension category, which is I can easily add, config management or release style functionality for things like templates to a cluster. And I think this gets to the question that we were having about Helm, which is the Helm APIs today aren't really Kube APIs. So there's no possibility today of extending Kubernetes to add Helm, like a Helm API that represents releases and so forth. If that starts to happen, the mechanism for that would probably be API extension. And so there's a question, I think, in general about, maybe I'll turn this back to Matt or somebody on the Helm side about how you see the Helm API evolving and whether it would eventually be something like an API extension.
yes, some parts of it. So in the stuff that's sort of loosely falling in the Helm 3.0 category are to what extent we can move more and more things to third-party APIs or whatever the tool du jour ends up being when we get there, because we would like to be able to expose things like Helm release objects in a way where you can consume them as a release and interact with them that way.
Yeah, I think everything is going to be, a year from now, everything's going to be somewhat of an extension in the sense that it's going to be integrated with Kubernetes to some degree. It's just going to be a matter of degree. I think we want kubectl and dashboard to be able to see both releases and non-Helm created objects in a single view and still provide like useful metadata about both, which applies some level of extension or integration.
Yeah. And so along those lines, like the two primary reasons for catalogs as API objects, or for templates as API objects, is it lets you build a catalog of things that you can then go instantiate, and it handles like the 80% case of create. One of the things that we've been discussing is moving it into the API extension path would actually be a way to prove out API extensions. Like there's a couple of things going on in Cube today that will help prove out API extensions, things from the core, service catalog, et cetera. But then on that second point, the list of things that you can go consume, the discussions going on right now about service catalog and exposing things through service catalog, I think there's really an opportunity here for us to tie things like Helm and templates and other create pre-canned things from a catalog into the catalog work in a way that really benefits, that builds on each other and enables it. So I'm almost tempted to put this one into the extension bucket for now, and then come back to it as we understand how the service catalog evolves.
Are there two parts? Like there's the templates API itself, but then is there also a fair amount of like infrastructure work just to handle the ability to store and deal with untyped or unschemified blobs within schemified blobs? So if I want to have like an anything template inside my object, don't I need some work on the API machinery to handle that?
Yeah, although I will say that it's still a very specific case, and if it's just for templates, I think it's like most of the underlying pieces are there. I think it's useful, but it really makes the most sense to talk about it in the context of what kind of client tools need it. And we're just kind of early on in that phase, right? So like generic client tools like kubectl, getting resources that it doesn't understand is something that has to go happen anyway. And some of that leads into that next bit of kubectl. So it's not that I don't care about this, but I do think it's best to line it up with some of the other initiatives and to support things like Helm, to do the things that support things like Helm and the service catalog all together, like holistically as a project, makes a lot of sense right now.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is we should move this out and leave that for the extensions category.
Yeah, I would say like it's possible. I think the use case that this is, it's possible to bring in new. Yeah, it's kind of a hard one to say right now.
Okay.
It sounds like it's a tool that something we may do to meet our user goals, but it's not, we're not specifying it as a goal of users in and of itself.
Right. And I think the discussions around the catalog stuff is something that we don't have enough yet to put on this, but I'd like to come back and put something on this maybe after Christmas or in the new year around how consumption of pre-canned things on the platform might look, and find a good use, craft up a use case that fits maybe under breadth, which is it's kind of on a default Kubernetes installation, there's a wide range of things that I can install easily, which is really the underlying goal of Helm and templates and a number of other tools out there.
All right. Should we add that to the breadth section? And then you can add more details after.
I think it's a bullet. I think it already is covered under the first bullet point.
Right. Okay.
And I would just we can put an asterisk under there, which says integration with service catalog or something like that.
Okay. I don't actually know how to spell catalog. Yeah. Okay. All right. The extension section. Eric, I'll hand it back to you. This is.
Yeah. So there's some comments about this that it's hard enough for users to write config that they should not have to write, code instead of config. That's going to be even harder. Definitely accept that as a valid concern. I guess this was, this is not in Mesos, there's a pattern where you could try to run things on top of, Aurora, or but also the most popular apps have dedicated like frameworks for them. I don't want to necessarily do things exactly the way they do in Mesos, but I like the idea that, you can have a blob of code that runs a really popular app really well. And I don't think you're ever going to accomplish that level of running wellness with a generic controller because the goals are different. And so my thought was we should explore and support both patterns and Kubernetes.
Yeah, and I think I'll add to this from a use case perspective. It's not so much like, yeah, I agree. Like everything should eventually be through configuration. I think that's the ideal state. But for everything in between, like if you have something that's not going to land or not be in GA state or release state for a year, and you need to fill a gap somehow, I think writing a controller that is a small amount of code that has a well-known pattern that works should be able to cover you for that year until it's in Kubernetes proper. And right now we don't have much of that. Like while people were waiting for a stateful set, they didn't have much to hold on to, right? So they could have had something in between that was a little bit closer to what they wanted or more specific to their use case, not generally applicable, and read a controller or something for that.
And we should probably break this into a couple of sub bits. Like there's different types of custom controllers. There's the ones that take over from one of the existing controllers or work in concert with an existing controller. And then there's the something which is like, how can I slam together the smallest possible amount of code and configuration to get something like an operator or
Exactly.
or an iterative config application platform as easily as possible? And there's overlap for those for sure.
And I think that it's about getting the scaffolding in place, because while it can be daunting to, maintain code, if you do have a starting point and an explanation for where that starting point is coming from and the methodology of that starting code, it becomes a lot easier to maintain over time, and it becomes less bespoke, actually.
Yeah. I would argue that the box applier is basically just a custom controller, and they were able to write that before we had any of this machinery. We've definitely done bits and pieces here. What sorts of things can we concretely target? Is it I can go build a new type of thing on Kubernetes that Kubernetes hasn't implemented yet? Is it that someone could go, like the CoreOS operator is a great example, like the etcd one is it's 5,000, 10,000 lines of Go code that reuses liberally, that has a lot of bells and whistles. What's the step below that? The bells and whistles that goes from being a toy to being useful if limited. Like, do we think we have enough info now to narrow down on that?
My example is always something like a dynamic provisioner. Like how do I build that? I have a NetApp sitting in my data center. How do I get like that to carve out NFS share for my Kubernetes cluster, for example? Like how would I write that? What things would I do to watch the API? Like even just that first control loop, having that there and showing, okay, here's where you would insert X, Y, or Z portion of your custom code for those kinds of controllers, I think would be useful. And I think on authorization side, there would be some ones that we would definitely want to plug in as well.
I think that's a really good point. Like I think a challenge with everything that we have today in the product is it goes so swiftly beyond simple.
Yeah.
Once you start hitting all the edge cases, the problem is we very rarely have simple controllers sitting around that form something that actually works, just isn't as performant or as complex or as parallelized. Yeah. Deployment controller is, started off simple and is no longer such. Stateful set controller started off as no longer such. The NFS dynamic provisioner started off as simple and is no longer such. So maybe we have to find a way to force ourselves to keep a simple example around, or a simple project. Like, is there anything in the ecosystem today that we can find that is a great example of this?
I was going to say the NFS provisioner, but yeah, that one got a little bit out of control.
Yeah, we should have like forkable like provisioners and like operators and various extension points where it's like add your code here and people can like fork that, add their code, and they just need to rebase if like we change our framework that we want people to use.
And the observer was intended to force people to stay at a certain level, which is to deal with things like per event and you don't get the complicated stuff. I do think that there's been kind of the desire to get that with the API extension stuff and to read from generic discovery clients so that it can work on any resource that's registered. Because a lot of that, the observer pattern basically is the simplest possible controller that can do a certain set of operations. So that may be another option for us.
So the other thing about custom controllers is like, we're never going to speak an application specific, protocol from a Kubernetes released controller, right? We're not going to like talk Redis protocol or MySQL or Cassandra or HDFS and like, but you can imagine someone wants like an HDFS controller that like gives you constantly is checking to see how well replicated your data is and like, turning, reorganizing your data to keep it spread across failure domains or whatever. We're not going to talk HDFS protocol from Kubernetes, but we want somebody able to build something that does that. I think we talk a lot about declarative config. There's also people who they don't care about declarative or config. They just like want to run this app well and have a GUI that, like has some numbers they can plug in and some pretty charts. And like, that's also a valid thing to want.
Yeah, and I think Clayton's example from earlier, the Postgres vacuum, like I want to create a Postgres vacuumer and I want to assign labels to that thing that goes to any pod that has those labels and does a vacuum using exec, right? Like that's not a crazy thing to like think about, and it should be relatively easy, but personally I wouldn't know where to start to even write that.
Yeah, I think we need to do, and this kind of ties into cluster ops, which is there's a whole gray area, which is you're not a feature provider, and you're not just a dumb consumer of whatever someone else has given you. Is you're taking your destiny into your own hands, and that ramp from taking your destiny into your hands needs to be as razor blade free and small step possible, or small step enabled as possible.
Yeah.
So what we should do is take a follow up for one of the as one of the groups and find a set of core examples and then look at what we can benefit from, like 2 or 3 diverse examples. I mean, I think it's absolutely would agree 100% that this is the goal of Kubernetes, is to have something in between we give it to you or you get nothing.
Yeah, exactly. This is also about allowing people to innovate and say, I think you should have this in core. And we say, well, we're not sure. Then like that conversation doesn't need to end at we're not sure.
Yeah, if I can pitch in here for a sec, I think that's fairly valid. I don't know if it's an incubator because it's essentially like charts for application lifecycle, right? And it could be outside of Helm. Yeah, but I've written several controllers and several schedulers, and it's kind of like, where do I put this so other people can take a look at this? I don't know if that's a repo or it's a contrib thing, or whether we carve out something like what charts is, which is just a place where people can, build on knowledge they have of application-specific workloads. And I'm sure if we show the path, more controllers will come about, and we can make decisions as to whether they need to belong in core.
So I didn't want to miss that. It was such a great opportunity. One thing we also need to take into account is the idea of self-contained controllers that might live with a chart versus something like an operator or a custom controller, which might be platform-wide. As clusters increasingly grow larger, we're going to have to be able to have something in the middle. So I think some of the one point on the custom controller and the Helm side is whatever the orthogonal tools we build for doing lifecycle are, we need to certainly take into account the difference between applies is global, local, or in between.
Okay, lots here. Michelle, should we scroll to the next one? I think we are all, yeah. Cron jobs to beta. it sounds like that'd be useful for like periodic vacuuming. I guess the only question there was whether or not some people had said maybe we should move cron jobs to be an extension. Is that a good use case for piloting third-party controller and packaging it up? Or is that something that like we think so many charts would like want to do something periodically that it's silly to make it be something you have to install first? Or is it easy to install it first if the cron controller is a chart? Any thoughts on that?
I'm going to speak as the author of the concept, but I'm afraid that the third-party extension is a little bit far away from being finished, and we currently provided the scheduled jobs previously, cron jobs, as an alpha feature, and we already have users that are using this pretty actively. And even though it's an alpha feature, and there's no need for us to support it in the alpha feature, there are quite a lot of users who are and demanded when we were changing the name to keep the name as is, or at least provide some backwards compatibility. And looking back in time when Borg was written. It also provided an option to run both the long-running tasks and periodic tasks such as cron jobs in Kubernetes. So, in my opinion, I would vote for this feature being part of the core cube.
Any other opinions on cron? Okay, well, that's been around for a long time. It has some users, so maybe it's not the best case to try to factor out. Let's get that to beta. Sounds good, Maciek.
Thank you.
Okay, Brian says that daemon sets are important and that we're going to use daemon sets as a way to deploy certain cluster components. That sounds good. I don't know if there's any controversy there.
Nope.
I have some people that are working on updating those roadmaps, and if you're also interested in updating those roadmaps, please either add it to the wiki or reach out to me and I'll connect you. Okay, next one. Storage, we talked about it already. Okay, enable third party. Brandon Phillips says something about Helm push with OCI.
I can talk a little about that if you want.
Sure.
So I work on the Quay team at CoreOS, and we're interested in kind of making a standard API for pushing and pulling Kubernetes applications to a registry. And we want to do that using OCI. We can use the OCI data types. And the main idea is if people want to manage their applications the same way they've been managing their containers, that's how we can go about accomplishing this. The first step that we've been working on is making a Helm plugin that actually enables this.
Yeah. This sounds good. I do want the level of abstraction of this document to be focused on like what the user experience is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could maybe think about a way to phrase that in a way that like emphasizes what the user's experience is rather than like specs, APIs, things that users probably don't dive into as much.
Okay, awesome. I can reframe it that way.
Okay, Mike Metral commented about Helm charts provide out-of-the-box services. I think Mike are you here, Mike? Are you talking about like what we call plugins or sorry, add-ons, I mean? Yeah, I think he's talking about add-ons, and it seems like there has been some back and forth between on the cluster, is it cluster lifecycle SIG, as to whether or not to use Helm or just plain like daemon sets and deployments to deploy the cluster add-ons. again, I would have the same comment. Like, I'm not sure what the right answer is here, but like to explain this as a user experience would be good.
Yeah.
The one concern I have with this is that does mean that the tiller component then has to be root to the entire cluster always, which I think is something that we probably need to have a discussion about from a security overall perspective. So,
Well, tiller is per namespace, if I understand it correctly. There's not one tiller for the whole cluster, is there?
This is one of the things that's changing in the 2.2 release is that originally you could only have one tiller per cluster, and it was sort of like a root installer sort of thing. Now, as of about the PR was merged about a week ago. It would allow you to run as many as one tiller per namespace. So if you
So you
want
could have a Kubernetes system tiller that's root, but the other ones would not be.
but the thing is that to deploy cluster level things like PVs, RBAC rules, cluster scoped roles, you're going to have access to do that from the tiller component, which means the tiller component is basically the super user of the system. So I think like this discussion about layering of like a component that installs other components, we need to have the impersonation discussion before we could go much further on this.
Yeah.
So that really belongs in cluster deployment probably. We can just have that discussion there.
Yep, I'm totally behind. I totally agree with that.
Okay. Next one. This is just saying, talk to API machinery. Yes. We will talk to API machinery about custom controllers. Mikhail mentions OC Observe. Yes, that is also a part of extensibility story. Next item. App controller. So app controller. Again, comment would be like, let's see. This is saying like, this is assuming that there is an app controller and then describing what you would do with it rather than describing what users want. And then by the way, app controller is the thing that meets that need. So it'd be possible to phrase that as like what users want to do at an abstract level. And then by the way, app controller meets those needs.
I don't think the author of this comment is on this call, but I can reach out to him after.
Sure.
I'm on this call. I guess the second bullet point catches what user can require of app controller the best. But yeah, if that answers your question.
Okay, so app controller is for applications that have complex sequences in their deployment.
Exactly, yes.
Is there an overlap between app controller and operators?
Actually, no. App controller was being developed before operators were announced. So, and we, as Mirantis, we didn't cooperate with CoreOS on their operator stuff.
So my view is that any application, small or complex, could be deployed using, or we'd like it if it's possible to deploy it in a generic config way, which if app controller becomes a generic piece of standard generic config, that'd be a way to do it, or using an operator, and that both patterns are valid. So like, I would say like maybe OpenStack is so, if that becomes so popular to deploy on Kubernetes, then you might end up with OpenStack operators. I think maybe there's someone working on that already. But if you're trying to deploy some internal thing that's not popular enough to have an operator, app controller might still be a good generic way to do that.
Got it. Thanks.
I don't know. That's my interpretation. I don't want to speak for the app controller folks.
Yeah, what you said makes sense, but actually you can also create a generic way to describe OpenStack or any other deployment in app controller that could be reusable by other folks, also in app controller format. But what you said is also valid, of course.
Has there been discussions? I haven't kept up with it as to like what the in-core or out-of-core status of app controller is. Is that still?
App controller is initially it was proposed to get into core, but there was resistance to this idea, so we developed it as external controller, external pod. So right now it's just a pod that you run in your cluster, and it uses third-party resources for storing data and API extension. It's actually completely outside of the core, so you need Kubernetes 1.4 and you can use app controller.
And I think as we pointed out before,
Speaking again, I'm Maciej's colleague from Mirantis. I'd like to speak about the difference between operators and app controllers. So I think that app controller is much more generic. Operators are written case by case use case. I mean, you got the etcd operator, you got the Prometheus operator, and for any other service like database, you're probably gonna write a different operator, which will not be resembling pretty much the other operators. App controller is more generic. You can express dependencies between Kubernetes objects, and this doesn't lock you in a particular use case. You can pretty much deploy any application, any complex application with it.
I agree with that. My expectation is that 1 or 2 years from now there will be operators for the top 10 apps in each category, database, batch, whatever. But the long tail will still need to be serviced by generic controllers, and the tail is fat, and so generic controllers will still be very important.
yeah, and the more we can work to have and I think this was brought up before, like the more that each tool can be used independently and is orthogonal to each other, the better off we are. Small slice, as we get better at extensions, reducing the cost of installing things on the platform that can manage the platform is really the end goal. And today you can bring a controller, but you can't bring an API, except as a third-party resource. And we're going to keep making that easier to bring components and install them. So the more that the tools can be used by each other, the better off we all are.
Yeah, I agree. In regard to ease of deployment and ease of installation of apps, as was said before when we were discussing Helm project, we are currently working on proof of concept of app controller being integrated into Helm. It actually kind of works, and as I wrote on chat, we are going to provide demo in short time, several days, I guess. So you'll be able to see how it works together with Helm. Yeah. And this is about the 4th bullet point in the I can deploy a complex application that has many sequence steps bullet point. I don't know if you want to leave it there. I mean, the one I can use AC in conjunction with Helm bit.
Who's the question directed to?
I'm not sure who is currently editing the SIG-Apps 2017 planning doc, because I thought that we were talking about what should we leave and what should be out of this document.
I just deleted that line. Is that good?
Yeah, I was referring to the 4th bullet point that it's also there. I can use AC in conjunction with Helm.
Yeah, that's, we can delete that. That's more prescriptive. Is that better?
No, I was fine with leaving that. I was just telling you about why this point was actually there.
Okay.
And I don't have anything more to say right now. So.
Do we want to address, I figured out how to continuously deploy my app and it's configured on Kubernetes. Anything we want to add there? And we already addressed the upstreaming OpenShift templates. Is there anything more on the stock?
I think we hit everything at least once.
Okay. What I'm hearing from this conversation is that we have some follow-up conversations to have as well. So I can gather those every time, we've said that we want to have a follow-up discussion. We can put that on the agenda for the next few meetings. Does that sound okay? Okay. All right, so if we're good with this doc, I'll stop sharing. The other items on today's agenda is to introduce the retrospective format and also the 1.6 planning document. I don't think we're going to have time to go through either of those today since we only have 5 minutes left, but let me show you those documents and describe what we need to do with them. And Eric, did you have anything more you needed to add or you'd like to add?
No, that's good. Take it away, Michelle.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, can everyone see this retrospective document?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the bottom part is, I think, the most urgent we want to do today or tomorrow. So if you've got a chance, please fill in any progress you've made on your particular project or Kubernetes feature or area that you've been working on. And I've tagged, this is from the 1.5 target list that we made. And so I've tagged the people who were signed up to do these particular tests. So if you can, just go ahead and fill in this document with what happened during 1.5. And if it's green, it's been completed. Yellow means it's still in progress and will carry over. And red, it was not completed or is blocked or has been rejected or needs attention. So just color it appropriately. If you have any color issues with seeing color, please let me know and I will figure out a different way to represent this information. Does that sound good to everyone? Silence means yes. And do we want to add anything to this portion? Let me know if you do, if you want to do that. Okay, so the other
quick question on this.
Yeah.
What level of granularity are we shooting for? Like every feature listed in the release notes, the highlighted features, I'm not totally clear.
I think it's more like high level objectives, like moving stateful set to beta in 1.5 was one of the objectives, and that's very high level. Nothing too granular. It's more of like big overarching goals. So moving Helm from alpha to stable 2.1 was good for Helm, unless we want to add any granularity there. This is more of just to understand at a high level what objectives did we set for 1.5 and what did we get? What actually happened? Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so the first part of this retrospective, or the first half of this document is something that probably looks familiar. If you haven't done a retrospective, what we'll do in the next meeting is just try to figure out, what did we do well in the 1.5 cycle? What could have gone better? things that didn't go so well, things that you're not so happy with, and then what can we do differently to iterate on this process for 1.6 and beyond. This format is taken from the Kubernetes community meeting. Please just be respectful in communicating. We haven't had any issues there so far. But if you want to add to this document, feel free to do so. There's a link in the agenda for today. And so we'll go ahead and continue this next week. The other document to keep in mind is the 1.6 planning. So we didn't get to that this meeting, but that will also be on the agenda for next meeting. So we can split, I guess we'll want the next 2 meetings for planning and retro. Do we think that we should do retro first and then planning, or planning and then retro? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Okay.
Is the proposed work for 1.6 being discussed now or later?
Well, we don't have any time to discuss it in this meeting since we only have a minute left. So we can carry that over to the next 2 meetings.
Sounds good. Thanks.
I would suggest that retrospective is nice to do first because the output of the retrospective might become input to the proposed work.
Okay.
I would actually propose the other direction, and mainly because there is not much time left for 1.6 when we will do what should be done for 1.6, and doing this in the order that was just proposed, put it further in time by yet another week. So I would like, at this point in time, the retrospective would be nice to be done beforehand. But with the time constraints, I would prefer to do the planning first so that we can actually have some goals set in stone. Eventually, during the retrospective, we can modify, but at least some crucial elements should be set in stone during the planning.
Yeah, I totally understand the concern on, not having enough time for actually working on the 1.6 proposed items. So let's take the first 5 minutes of the next week's meeting and go through just at a high level what got done and what needs to be carried over. And that'll help us talk more about what we want to do with 1.6. And then we can add retro or start retro at the end of that meeting if we have time. If not, we can carry retro to the meeting after. And I agree with you, Matt, as well, that retro is nice to do before planning, but in this particular case, I think it's okay to switch just for this particular time. Is that okay with everyone? I'll take silence to be yes. So we went over by a minute. Thank you everyone for joining and have a great day and have a great holiday as well. There won't be meetings for the next 2 weeks. So I'll see you on January 9th. Thank you.